Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dinner Discourse, a conversation with Monyee Chau and Dong-Ping Wong. I'm Lisa Gold, A4's Executive Director, and thank you so much for joining us. A quick accessibility check. I am a Hapa, half Korean, half white woman with shoulder length or pandemic length hair, wearing a white t-shirt with a red and purple design celebrating the year of the ox. Tonight's program is closed captioned, so if you'd like to enable the captions, there is a CC icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen menu that has the words live transcript on it, and you can click on that icon to enable the captions. I'm really excited to present this conversation as part of our virtual Lunar New Year celebration. It's always so fun having the opportunity to speak with Dong-Ping and Monyee. It's just been so great working with Monyee, who commissioned this amazing Year of the Ox limited edition t-shirt. Their hoodies available too. And always, like I said, it's so fun connecting with Dong, who always amazes me with his just amazing, unique, inventive, rule busting ideas. It's so fun. But before I introduce them, I just need to make a few announcements. So first of all, feel free to ask questions by dropping them in the chat or raising your hand, but know that there'll be a Q&A segment at the end of the program. So don't despair if we don't answer your question on the spot. And we are recording this program and we'll share it later on our Facebook page and our YouTube channels. And also we have a very short survey that we'd love for you to fill out at the end of the program, because your input just helps us create better and better programs. So thank you in advance for doing that. A few A4 upcoming program announcements. If you are a dancer or a choreographer or a musician or arranger or composer whose birthday is on or after May 1st, 1990, consider applying for the 2021 Jadin Wong or Van Leer Fellowship. The applications for these fellowships are on our website. And we'll be holding information sessions to answer your questions about applying on Tuesday, the 23rd at noon for the Jadin Wong Fellowship, and on Wednesday, the 24th at noon for the Van Leer Fellowship. These programs are really great for an emerging artist. They offer $6,000 in unrestricted cash grants, plus career coaching and an artistic mentor pairing and other career development support. So please check it out, tell your friends, it's a great opportunity. And then in addition to tonight, we have a few other artist-driven programs that we are celebrating the Lunar New Year with and welcoming the Year of the Ox. You can participate in a red envelope exchange through an online platform designed by some of our artists, or you can learn how to make tukoy, which is a traditional Filipino New Year dish. And it's an interactive recipe program created by one of our artists, our virtual resident artists. And last night we attempted to go to the moon with Alex Lynn, another one of our virtual residency artists. It was really fun despite our catastrophic mission fail. It was still a great learning experience. So if you want to support programs like this, or just A4's mission in general to ensure greater representation and visibility and opportunities for artists, feel free to send us a virtual hung bao. And for any donation of $100 or more, we will send you a copy of the 2021 Pocket Chinese Almanac, courtesy of our friends Joanna Lee and Ken Smith. We have only a few of these left, so get your donations in today. It's really great. It'll tell you all the things that are good for the day. Today is a bad day for hairdressing, as you can tell. So next month, our town hall will take place on Tuesday, March 23rd at 6:30, and the focus is on performing arts and advocacy. Town hall is a super great way to get connected to the Asian American creative community and find out what people are doing, which is a little bit challenging right now in the pandemic. So this is a great way to have some virtual networking and learn about all the creative things that artists are doing. Our featured speakers are going to be Jimena Garnica, who's the driving force behind the Cultural Solidarity Fund, and she's the artistic director of Lemay Ensemble, and Brooke Ishibashi of Be an Arts Hero. She was also in Cambodian rock band. So you, believe me, you definitely want to know about the Cultural Solidarity Fund. Which is launching on February 26th at 9 o'clock, and they will be offering emergency microgrants to artists and cultural workers. The application is a super simple Google form. It's only open for 1 week, so bookmark that URL, culturalsolidarityfund.org. Priority is being given to artists and cultural workers in need and the BIPOC, disabled, undocumented, and immigrant community. So A4, we were very happy to be able to support this. They've raised $100,000 so far. Unfortunately, that only covers a minute portion of the need in our community, but I hope you will come to Town Hall, learn more about how you can get involved, sign up for the fund if you need emergency support. So that's that. And then finally, many of you know that we lost a legend last month, Corky Lee. He was more than the undisputed, unofficial Asian American photographer laureate. He was one of our founders at A4, and he was just an inspiration to generations of artists and social activists. So we're going to be hosting a tribute to Corky on Sunday, March 7th from 3 to 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And it'll feature some video and performances and remembrances by a number of Corky's friends and colleagues. We'll be posting the link for you to RSVP very soon. So you can just check out our website or our newsletter and stay connected, and we'll be sharing that information very, very soon. And as always, thanks to the team behind the scenes, Priscilla and everybody else at A4 and all of our supporters who make these events possible, especially the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the New York City Council, the New York State Council on the Arts, with the support of Governor Andrew Cuomo and the New York State Legislature, and so many generous individuals for their support of our programs. And then now I'd like to do a very short land acknowledgement, kind of a virtual acknowledgement, because in pre-COVID times, we would be meeting in the A4 offices, which are on the unceded lands of the Lenape and Canarsie peoples. But because we're meeting virtually, I'd like to share this digital land acknowledgement, which was written by Canadian theater artist Adrienne Wong. Since our activities are shared digitally to the internet, let's also take a moment to consider the legacy of colonization embedded within the technologies, structures, and ways of thinking we use every day. We're using equipment and high-speed internet not available in many Indigenous communities. Even the technologies that are central to much of the art that we make leave significant carbon footprints, contributing to changing climates that disproportionately affect Indigenous peoples worldwide. I invite you to join me in acknowledging all of this, as well as our shared responsibilities, to make good use of this time, and for each of us to consider our roles in reconciliation, decolonization, and allyship. And now to the main event. Like I said, it is my great pleasure to introduce Monyee Chau and Dong-Ping Wong. I'm going to read abbreviated bios for them, as they are both like very accomplished, and you can read their full bios on our website. Monyee is an interdisciplinary queer Chinese Taiwanese American artist. They explore a journey of healing through decolonization and reconnecting with their roots and ancestors through a variety of mediums, focusing on themes of labor. Their work can be found on Instagram at Monyee Art, or on their website, ChineseBornAmerican.com. And Dong-Ping Wong is the founding director of Food New York, which is a design firm based in New York City. The studio focuses on designing environments, from ground up structures to renovations to landscapes, all with the intent of transforming how people relate to the context, culture, and resources around them. From the world's first floating water filtering pool to the stage design for Kanye West's Yeezus tour, Dong's work is amazing. It's been featured in publications, won numerous awards, and even in TED Talks. So you can learn more about him on his website and Instagram as well. So here we go. We're going to start with the appetizer course of this dinner. So Monyee and Dong, please tell us a little bit about yourselves and your favorite Lunar New Year traditions.
Monyee, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, hi everyone. So excited to be here and so excited to be chatting with Dong. It's been a really awesome experience getting to know each other. And so I am a Seattle-based and born artist, and I grew up in the Chinatown International District in Seattle, which is the place that housed my family growing up. We had a couple different family restaurants, and the last one that we had was something that was very important to the growth of my practice and sort of coming to terms with who I am and who I am as a political identity. So yeah, and are we talking about our Lunar New Year favorite traditions? Is that correct?
Yeah.
So I think food is an obvious one. And I wanted to make sure that I put that in there. But yeah, I mean, all of the food that we have and also that interaction of I made your favorite food for dinner tonight, specifically because it's Lunar New Year. That always like really gets to me. And then I think a very specific experience that I really do love about Lunar New Year is watching the lion dances and the ways that the drums make my chest feel. It makes me feel really present and grounded and really excited. And yeah.
Also, yeah, it's pretty amazing to be on this talk, and thanks Lisa, thanks A4, thanks Monyee. As Lisa said, I'm an architect in New York. I actually don't remember what else to really intro. I actually think Lisa, your intro is pretty incredible. So I'll go straight to the food or the Lunar New Year part. I mean, I was trying to think, I don't actually think my family had a ton of traditions, except that every year we just either we'd invite or we'd go to our kind of core group of like Chinese American friends and family growing up in San Diego. I think it was about 6 or 7 families, all roughly the same age and development and time spent in the US. But the thing I think that was my favorite part about that, obviously besides seeing Woody, was the food was always served sort of like buffet style. It was always laid out on like a counter or whatever it was. And my favorite part was basically the moment where everybody's gotten their plate and is looking at the food, and you can see how excited everybody is, but they haven't fully like sat down to eat yet. And there's just like, you know, kind of like the talking stops. Everybody's like focused. And I think that moment of like where anticipation and hunger like at their peak and it hasn't been like satiated yet was always my favorite part. Plus obviously it's when the food looks the best and you can smell everything, but obviously it's very food centric.
That's awesome.
I want that again. I missed that part.
I miss it too. Well, why don't we move into more of the meatier conversation, the main course. So we had a little like pre-planning call, and the conversation was just so rich and so interesting. We had talked about this concept of Asian Americanness and your kind of coming to your identity. So I would love it if the two of you could just share a little bit more about what prompted you to really interrogate and think more deeply about your Asian Americanness.
Yeah. Do you want to go first this time, Dong?
Sure. I mean, so I guess like where I grew up was pretty white. San Diego is a large chunk of San Diego is pretty white. And you know, it was never a question, obviously, that I wasn't white. I was always clearly Asian. I don't think that was ever a question. But what's interesting is I think my understanding of my Asian Americanness up until probably the last decade was always like in opposition to or in other to the white world that I was really kind of part of, or maybe not even really a part of, on the outside of. And I think something that Monyee and I discussed in one of our first calls was being Asian and American for the longest time was kind of like this split between, are you Asian enough or are you American enough? It was always kind of like not being enough of one thing or another, certainly not being white enough, not being American enough, not being like Californian enough, whatever it was. But I think what's been interesting, and frankly, I think it's actually, I really look to like a lot of the younger artists, Monyee as a great example of that, for how to start forming Asian American identity as a solely unique and kind of third thing, not Asian and American combined, but actually like its own thing. But I'd say that's relatively new to me in my life, again, like in the last decade or so. But yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear, especially like how Monyee, if that was ever a split, or if it was always kind of clear from day one that it was a wholly unique, you were a wholly unique person in that way.
Yeah, I think that's like a really hard thing that isn't it's not uncommon for a lot of Asian American folks to like feel that way. I feel like our political identity coming and like immigrating here was really difficult to navigate because oftentimes like we didn't fit a lot of the narratives, and so those narratives were always told for us. And so I feel like this idea of identity for Asian Americans has been really hard to sort of pinpoint. And also it's difficult because there are so many different kinds of Asian folks, and Asian folks are, we're not like a, what's the word? We're not like a,
Like a monolith?
thank you. I was like, it's an M word, I can't remember. But like, yeah, exactly. We're not a monolith at all. And I think that the narrative that, kind of depicts Asians is generally like East Asian folks and light-skinned East Asian folks. And so it's really difficult to break out of a narrative if you have been socialized to fit it for so long, and also as a means of survival, right? Like we're trying to assimilate just so that we can survive in a place that wasn't built for us. And I think that like there were really intentional points in my art practice where like I really was trying to figure out what it meant to sort of navigate both these worlds of like not being Asian enough or not being American enough. And so I think that like when I read this article about Black hair and beauty standards, like I shared this with you before, where we talked about how they're like, I think afros and dreadlocks are such a like symbol of Black power, and those aren't inherently like an African thing or inherently an American thing, but solely an African American thing. And so I think when I read that, it made so much sense to me, where like, Asian Americanness has always been put in boxes, but those boxes have always been question marks. And so like, what does it mean to like really define it for yourself? And I feel like there was that moment for me in my work was so liberating, because I am just trying to validate exactly what my experience has been rather than trying to fit those experiences into any sort of categories. And so I think that was like a huge change for me, and I feel really lucky that came so early in my life, where I'm able to work on the healing that I need to do for all of that harm that happens when you only have like the one story line for us. Yeah.
Did you have, I don't know if I asked this before, did you have any Asian American role models growing up?
I feel like that was really hard for me to have access to be honest. I think like also as someone who was trying to distance myself from my identity, like I think I unintentionally and subconsciously didn't. I think there were times where I, like I watched a lot of like David Chang, or like my dad and I talked about David Chang a lot like growing up, but other than that, like there hasn't been a ton of like Asian influence for me. What was that like for you growing up?
I mean, same. I mean, what's funny is like David Chang, I feel like is one of maybe like 3 people I can remember that I was like, oh shit, they're loud. And that alone was like a shock that you'd have loud Asians. And still to this day, I'm like, if there's a loud Asian, I'm like, ooh, it's like very exciting still. But no, I mean, I look back and I think I didn't have a single Asian American or Asian even role model. And I think part of it was, to your point, I probably wasn't really looking for it at the time, certainly like pre-college. And, but you know, as dumb as it is, like there weren't Asian American movie stars, there weren't Asian American like pop stars, there weren't like public facing big famous Asian Americans, as dumb as that is, there weren't like Asian American sports stars. And so culturally that didn't really exist. I don't think that was even an option. And very similar maybe to the article you were mentioning, I didn't really develop, I mean, I basically started getting into rap and hip hop for very similar reasons, that there was another culture that wasn't white, basically. And only later did I realize that actually that was like, Black culture was such a model for how to, I mean, basically it's like the model for how to form a totally singular, unique identity from an amazing mixture of other cultures, but without just being a kind of weird hybrid in a sense. But yeah, I would say like, that was actually, I think even now, like there's more and more Asian Americans that I really look up to or really excited about. But one of the things I think that got me excited about exploring Asian American identity was realizing that even in a small way, other people might be looking up to me as like a model for it. And it was like shocking to even realize that, but actually it's really exciting. Like the idea that you can actually have freedom now to define a totally unique take on a culture was why, I mean, it's still wild to me to even like comprehend.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to think of some of the things that we like talked about in previous conversations, but also like bringing new things in. And I think I've been like really trying to take in like what my art is for or what it does for me and really process that. And I've come to a place where I realize like this is the way that I can communicate or process my emotions best. Like, I don't think that like, I grew up in a household where we had like 4 different languages. And although like English is my first language, like I still like have trouble with it because I was surrounded by, folks who also had trouble with it. And so like I know that this is the way that I can convey my emotions and communicate. And so like I think something that has been really rewarding for me is like the ability to validate myself in all of the like stupid things that I feel are stupid, but like really aren't, where like I had mentioned before, like, using Google Translate and using my dad for like being like, what does this say? Or like, how do I say like this thing in Chinese? And giving myself the validation in that, because like, okay, you know what, like I don't want to feel ashamed about that because that has been my history, that has been like my truth, and I'm going to live my truth. And so like giving myself permission to validate all of that, like I feel like other folks have come to me and said that like they feel like they can do that too. And I feel like that's been the most rewarding thing of this kind of work and practice, is just like, what does it mean? You can just like be yourself. And in doing that, like, the people who really resonate with all the things that you are interested in and passionate about, like kind of gravitate towards you. And I think you build community in a really special way that way. Like for me to be in this conversation with all of you, I feel so grateful for it, because I feel like I've just been able to be who I am and talk on who that is, and I'm here now like speaking with you all.
Do you remember, like, maybe it was after the article, was there a conscious shift in how you created your art, or what your art looked like, or what kind of themes you incorporated or not after that?
Yeah, thanks for asking. That's a really great question. I feel like what has really been like, I look at my practice in a lot of stages. So I remember that stage of being like, okay, like, what do I want to make art about? Like, I want to save the world, but then it's like, how do I do that? And then I'm like, okay, well, let me talk about like who I am and figure out like what that is. And then what are the things that taught me who I am? It's like the really Chinese restaurant that I grew up in, that like, day to day I would go to school and assimilate as much as I could and hide from it. But then have to return back to this like place that's so drenched in like Chinese imagery and like symbology. And so I started doing a lot of work about my family's restaurant, and then how that brought like communities together and how that taught me to build community. And I started to think about my family and think about process. I did a lot of work around like my grandmother spending, you know, hours in the backyard, like working on folding and like making all of these sticky rice, like the zongzi, and they like she'll have them hanging in bundles, like literally in this pantry, just covered. And like she made them to share with folks. And so I think because of thinking of like this labor, right? I think I felt so tied to these processes, and I feel like process is just as important as the item and art itself. And so I think I'm really taking into account like what it means to like have me make these dumplings that I made out of glass and make them with my hands in a material that I'm familiar with, where like my grandma would do the same thing in her process in making food for everyone too. Yeah.
I love that it's food related. It makes me so happy.
It's all been food
I was
related.
like, it
We didn't
had to
even
be
think
food
about
related.
that. Exactly. What about you? Like, what was that kind of pivotal moment for you in your career?
I mean, I was trying to think. I think mine was more diffuse, or in that I guess it makes sense, like being an architect, but I think it was really about the environment I was in. So, like the fact that I had to physically remove myself from California and come to New York, and after being in New York for a number of years, it was the first time in my life. I mean, at that point I'd probably been in New York 6 years or so, where I actually felt at home anywhere. Like I'd never had that feeling where you could actually let your total guard down and feel like you could disappear into a city. And New York was the only place, and still probably the only place in the world that I've been where I could feel that way. And it was literally that moment of like, coming back from a trip, coming over the Brooklyn Bridge or Manhattan Bridge or something, and just feeling that like sigh of relief that you've kind of returned home. And I realized it's purely because every ethnicity is represented here, every kind of like desire, every sort of identity is sort of part in New York. So there's no way really for you to stick out. And I thought that as in a really good way, if you don't want to. And so that I think coincided with me living and working, just inching my way closer and closer into Chinatown and Manhattan. At first, not on purpose. I think I liked the area. But then as I realized it, it's like, oh, there's actually, similar to your questions, like who is your art for? It was very similar, like who are we designing for? What's the architecture for? And you're like, why am I not working directly with the community right in front of me? That is not only in a way like my community, but also like my neighbors. And so that started happening. And I think that was really designing for that environment that I was in. I think the environment I was in not only affected me from an identity point of view, but actually gave me an immediate, I was like, oh shit, if I don't design for my neighbor, like what's the point of the kind of work we're doing? And so we started doing more and more work in Chinatown, which I think kind of backed up into critiquing what an Asian American architect would be, what designing for Asian Americans was like. But I wouldn't say it was intentional at the beginning. It was very much just what made me comfortable in a way and excited. And again, I think I owe it completely to, I owe a big part obviously to my parents and the fact that I was forced to speak Cantonese growing up. So that was always there. But a huge part just being in the place that I was in at the time I was there and still in. Yeah, that was really, really key. Do you have, I mean, I was trying to think now, like what's next, especially after such a wild year, but have you do you have a sense of where to take your art? Like, does it feel like an evolving thing, or do you like, oh, I'm doing this exactly, and you're gonna like go for it?
Yeah. I don't think I have a plan. Like I actually originally had a plan of like, yeah, like moving to LA and then putting that on pause for the fact that like I wanted to kind of avoid some of the COVID cases there.
Okay.
And like I'm kind of taking a chance to slow down and really process like you know, everything that our communities have been going through over the past year. Because I think there's been so many things like consistently happening all the time that it's really hard to just like sit and process it all. But ultimately, like, I think something that I'm kind of working towards is like, I do really love working with like the organizers in Chinatowns. I really love like, you know, I think it was really jarring to grow up in Chinatown and then to not learn that the history of Chinatowns was built because of racism. And so like, you know, I felt like I have a personal, like I want to work on that. And I want to make sure that like that's a history that folks are aware of. And so that they can come into these neighborhoods with like the respect that they deserve and that they like understand that these communities are built for a reason and that we should congregate in ways that are, you know, for the betterment of the community. And so I've been wanting to, like, I think a dream project of mine is to be able to visit and organize with all of the Chinatowns, especially across like Turtle Island. And so I think it'd be really fun, really great to learn the like so many things from so many folks who have, you know, so many stories. Like we love to talk. And so like, and then like I know that there's gonna be food involved. So definitely my dream project. How about you? Do you have like a dream project?
I guess so. I mean, we've been trying to do, or I've been trying to do a kind of like Chinatown community center, like a weird version of a community center, or like night market, or just big open place to eat kind of thing. Of course it's food related. But for that exact reason, I think it's like, especially, so I'm most familiar with Chinatown, Manhattan, and I think there's definitely a couple spots like Columbus Park that are the gathering spots, but there's, even for me, like it's hard to really define like what the heart physically of Chinatown, Manhattan is. And I think without that, the understanding of Chinatown, both of the inhabitants and from outsiders, I think is really loose. And sometimes that's a really good thing, but also I think it's like having a physical place that can kind of represent in a lot of ways, like the pride and the strength and the generations of Chinatown would be an amazing project to be a part of, let alone something that's very active on a day-to-day, serving just kind of like straightforward needs, you know, a place to hang out, a place to like eat lunch, a place to have that market. So that's something that is really, really, really exciting to me. I know politically it's really tricky. I know like physically and funding wise it's really tricky, but yeah, if I hope that that's a project. And I think there's actually a couple groups starting things like that. There's always interest in doing something like that. But hopefully one day we can work on. I mean, we should work together on it. I think I know.
Yeah.
We should totally do like a countrywide Chinatown project. That'd be actually pretty amazing. I had this really funny, I was like on a talk a couple days ago for a group in Denver, like nothing to do with Chinatown, except at the end of the talk, I was asking basically why this group existed. It was like this downtown group. And they said part of it was they had a project where they're trying to understand the history of downtown Denver. And one of the histories was that it was built over a Chinatown. And so they're now discovering all these artifacts of a Chinatown that was erased. And it was just like a total wild coincidence. I don't think there was a single Chinese person on the panel, but it was amazing that like that was also there in downtown Denver. So yeah, we should totally have like, there really isn't like a Chinatown network, is there? Like countrywide.
There is a
there is.
CCED called which is like Chinatown's coalition or Chinatown Coalition for it's called Coast to Coast. I'm sorry. There's so many like Chinatown orgs in my head, but it's called Coast to Coast. And I think it's all of the Chinatowns that like are, in North America.
Oh, amazing. I have to look that up.
Yeah.
That's so
yeah,
great.
Lisa, we should do, we should do like a big A4 coast to coast project.
Yeah, awesome. Like looking at all of the, actually, I believe that the Museum of Chinese in Americas has been working with a lot of like the Chinatown community groups across the country. So that's probably worth investigating.
That's cool.
So I'm going to be your wait staff. I'm going to remove your entrees and we're going to move on to dessert. And hopefully you each picked a project. So we asked you to select a project of the other's work and then have them talk about it. So I'm kind of curious, like, Dong, tell us why
Yeah.
you selected this project of Monyee's, and then Monyee, you can tell us about your project.
Sure. So the project I selected is this print called Hunter Gather. Is that right? Hunter Gather?
Hunter and Prey.
Sorry, Hunter and Prey. I knew Hunter was in there. I'm sorry.
No, it's good.
But I mean, it was actually really tricky selecting this work because I mean, they have such an amazing strength of work across all the graphics that they do. But I think this one, especially of Monyee's, I loved because it both, like the aesthetics of it, I think are really striking. I love how direct it is, but also I think you described that the text, actually, I shouldn't say what the text was, but maybe you can tell me what the text was, but I loved what it said.
Yeah. Cool. I'm really happy you chose this piece. I feel like it's been really, honestly, this is like probably one of the best prints I've ever pulled. It's a really large one. I think it's about like this is not, we're like virtual, so this is not
It's like screen size.
yeah. But it's a vitreograph, and so what that is like it's using a panel of glass, and you alter the surface of the glass and use it to print. Vitreography is a pretty new process in the glass world. I believe it may only be about like around 40 years old, and there's not a lot of books on it. And so we were really experimenting when I was up at Pilchuck Glass School, which is in Stanwood, Washington. It's just like a bunch of glass people on a tree farm, and you just like hang out and make art. And yeah, it's really fun. And so I kind of wanted to make this piece because like I wanted to have this imagery that's like very striking, very like very Asian. And so I wanted to have this crane fighting this snake, and the Chinese text actually just says like this has no meaning, because I wanted people to kind of take their assumptions and really look at themselves as to like why you choose to put this like meaning onto me, and sort of like turn it on its head. I feel like there's these conversations of being pigeonholed as an artist, especially if you are like an artist of color. And like, yeah, I love to like make artwork about my identity, but oftentimes like, I also don't have to just make art about my identity or make things that just look Chinese. And so I wanted to make this piece as like a commentary on some of that. Like, I think I did a similar print that there were a bunch of like lanterns, and there was like Chinese text on them, and it just said "Ba Po," which is like, bitch. And so I wanted to have people sort of have these expectations and then kind of have it be turned on their head, just so that they can understand the way that they are perceiving me, because that's an experience that artists of color have all the time. And when you have the privilege of not being pigeonholed in your career, you don't have that sort of experience. And so I kind of wanted to explain it in a very active and like interactive way. So yeah.
I also like, I'm very curious about the idea of an Asian American aesthetic. I mean, which obviously can be a multitude of things and lots of different versions of that. And even just like trolling your IG, I think what's really great is that whether it's an artwork you produce or your makeup or how you dress, there it does become, you start getting a sense of Monyee's version of an Asian American aesthetic, which is very wholly unique. And I thought this piece was really good, especially because it didn't shy away from Asian iconography or color even. But like you said, played, I think, on the characters, the usage of the characters. But no, it was one of those things where when you see it, you're like, I don't really know what this is about, but it's obviously, it sticks in your head, and I really wanted to hear more about it.
Yeah. Also like something that was like really fun with this was like the video that was just shown. It is I wanted to play with like this black matte Reeves BFK, which is the paper. And so what I did was I took the same red from the original print, and I was like, oh, I'm just going to use this red transparency on the black just to see what happens and just to play. And it came out completely green. And I thought that it was just so interesting because the way that it kind of moves when you walk around it is just has this really interesting shine to it. And I thought it was just a fun, interesting thing that happens, especially when I'm talking about expectation and kind of, yeah, putting that into the process as well. And then is it okay if I go ahead and ask about yours?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So I chose yours, which is I don't remember the name, but it's the bathhouse. I'm out of a hedge. Can you
Yeah,
remind me?
it's perfect. It doesn't really have a name yet, so actually,
Okay.
whatever we want to name it is perfect.
Okay. I wanted to ask you about this one just because specifically, like, I know you're located there now, working on the project, and we've been having calls where you show me these absolutely beautiful backdrops, and it's absolutely so rude. But
I
it's
do feel
interesting.
mildly bad about it.
I just think that like your renderings of it are so exciting, and I think as someone growing up, I really wanted to be an architect actually, and I was really interested in the process. And so something that I felt really drawn to about this project was specifically, having it be carved out of a hedge, or having this concept of, starting with a hedge and building out of that, was such an interesting process to me and so exciting because I felt like I've never really heard of that kind of way of approaching a project in terms of in architecture, but I'm also not familiar with a lot of architecture. And so, yeah, that's why I've been curious about this one.
um, Thanks. I mean, this is probably one of my current live favorite projects that we have going on, or that I have going on. And so the basic gist of it is it's a bathhouse project in the Cayman Islands, so in the Caribbean, and it's part of a much larger set of projects. I'm just part of this one specifically, but the larger project is it's basically a hotel, I guess, in the most straightforward way. But at least what I found really interesting of it is that the owners of the hotel, the guys who started it, they're both really young, but they're Sudanese British, so they're also basically brown British people, and so much of what they do, the people they invite down, the food they offer, um, seems very much for I mean, lack of a better term, like basically black and brown kids who, for example, I never felt ever going to any kind of hotel-y or luxury anything that it was a place for me until I came here. And I think that's purely because of who runs it and who has the ownership over it. And so this project, I think two things are really important to me. One, that it was a place for people like me and people that don't look like me, but for people that maybe never had a very fancy bathhouse for themselves in a way. I mean, I don't know who does, but a place that they could call their own. But so it was really important that I think it looked different, and the approach was different. But the other side, I think, was, I mean, similar to what we were talking about before, that because Cayman is obviously very hot, and the climate is actually kind of perfect for a bathhouse, that it was sort of like totally driven by the environment, by the climate, by the weather. And so the idea of doing the thing entirely outdoors, the idea of doing the thing out of completely out of plants that exist on the island, was really, really enticing and appealing. And I mean, again, full credit to the guys here for kind of going along with it. But I am very happy that I mean, for me also, I don't think I've seen a project that looks like this, or that approached space making like this. Fingers crossed that it turns out well. It's under construction now. But the other thing that I find really interesting about it is because it's all plants, it will evolve and change, and at times it'll look sort of empty and dead, and at times it'll look overgrown and bushy, and you do have to caretake it, which I love about a piece of architecture, as opposed to like building it and like moving away. But yeah, I was really excited when you chose this one, because I think it's one of the weirdest, both in look but in process, of the projects we're doing. And also the fact that I'm like across the street from it is very it's great.
I love how much you've translated that feeling of something so unique and something that is like feels like it can be home for you into a place that like looks so unique. And also I feel like I would like, even just like looking at the renderings, like it looks like a really exciting place to like congregate and like be in community with people, because it looks like it's just so designed for that. Yeah, it's so cool to see, and it's really cool to know that like you're there right now and working on it.
Yeah, yeah. I actually, it makes me really happy that you're reading all that stuff, just from the imagery of it. That's super exciting. I feel like it's like the kind of gold standard for myself of when a thing translates or communicates across, like the ideals of it. The other thing that I think was really important about this project is, um, because everything's outdoors, it gave us a chance to, how do I put it? Basically, like have as little doors as possible, literally. So like, there's as little barriers between you being in the space and you being on the outside of the space. And that is both something I think really important for the bodily experience of a place, but also just psychologically, like being on the outside of a culture, outside of a group of people. This, I think, was trying to avoid that as much as possible. But that you can, even in this image, that you can kind of weave your way around, and you're actually, going into different environments. There's some environments that are much hotter, some environments that are much colder, without a distinct in or out for a lot of these places. And it's a test, I think. I think I couldn't have picked a better physical climate for it to try these things. So that got really lucky. But yeah, I think it does represent a lot of the physical things we're trying to do as an office, but also like my personal identity things that I'm trying to figure out.
That's so cool. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks for picking it.
I love both of those projects. And I just want to ask you both, because I mean, one of the reasons why we wanted to put you in conversation with each other was not only this obsession with food, like, but also,
Of course.
I mean, your engagement with communities, both within and across different communities. And I don't know, I was just hoping maybe you could talk, maybe Dong, you could talk a little bit about the radio program
Yeah,
or the
sure.
project, and just talk, and Monyee too, you can talk a little bit about your work with across different communities, like your the solidarity projects that you've been working on.
I mean, I think it's exactly, I think Monyee said it, where when you realize that your work is resonating with other people, and especially frankly, like other people that look like you, it's totally like an oh shit moment. At least it was for me, that that same thing of like not having people that looked like me growing up, that suddenly you could potentially inspire someone else to do something really incredible on their own. And so the radio program that Lisa's referring to, a couple years, about a block away from our office in Chinatown, we started something called Food Radio. We took over a space temporarily, built out a very simple kind of working space, and invited anybody in the community, anybody wanted to come by, you could just kind of post up there. We moved a bunch of our library down there, you could just hang out and work. But also in the back of it, we ran a live interview. Well, we ran a radio station that was just all live interviews. And so the list was all artists, chefs, musicians, architects, designers, all creative people. And the point of it was, I only had one set question, which was, how did you make your first dollar? And so the whole point of the radio session was, how do you actually survive and make money doing something that is what you love / different than what anybody else is really doing? And the target audience was very much the kids in Chinatown. It was very much for a pretty impoverished community that you could actually survive and thrive doing something creative. And I've been trying to, I mean, we wanted to do it last year, but of course COVID kind of ruined that. So I'm going to try to start a version of it here in Cayman. But it's probably one of the best ideas I think our office has ever had, even though it's a very small, very specific thing. But exactly to Monyee's point, I think it's rewarding because you have direct interaction with that community, and building more and more of that community. I think just like we thrive off that.
Yeah, I feel like there's such a beauty of being able to really connect with folks who have those same experiences with you, and who like live and like validate your diaspora in so many different ways. And so I feel like oftentimes like a lot of my work can be out of responses of those connections and those moments. Like I made this piece recently about mutual aid, and I I was listening to my friend J.M. Wong, who is an amazing, amazing community organizer, and I really, really do admire them. And they were speaking so passionately about how mutual aid is our legacy, and how the fact that, like, you know, our people didn't have the words mutual aid because it was already something that was so ingrained in our culture and in our society, that like we help each other. Like, we are not an individualistic community. Like, we have to have each other because we cannot survive without each other. And so like I I took that so to heart, and just like really like got to be so excited about something where I knew that mutual aid was really important, but also understanding it in a different context of like, this is legacy, like this is something that our people have been doing, and I want to honor that. And so like, you know, I made this poster to try and like raise some more funds to support the mutual aid efforts that were happening in Seattle at the time. And like, yeah, I don't think like, I know that none of my work would be the same or what it is without community, because they've guided me in so many conversations that are like really fun and also like really hard, but also like holding you in a really tender way. And I think that, you know, our works are so important because I think sometimes, oftentimes we like forget that you have such an impact as a person and as a creator. And like, even if one person sees it, like there is something happening, right? Like there is something that that person is taking away from what they're experiencing with you. I think when I started to make work about my grandmother and like having all these dumplings, I had so many people come to me about stories about their grandmother and like the food that they shared with their grandmother. And I think specifically like that moment of being able to like have people feel like they can open up to you about these things and relate to you, I think is such a beautiful thing. And I just think it continues to motivate and inspire me like all the time. And so yeah, your radio project, like I remember like scrolling through your website when we found out that we are going to be on a talk together, and I was like, oh my god, these projects are so cool. Like it's really cool to see all the things that that you're working on and doing, because they're so different, and like it's just great to see. But yeah.
Thank you.
I was gonna say, like, even, I mean, the food analogy is so great all the time, but you know, it's like when you cook for someone, I feel like first and foremost, you have to like the food. Like, it's like, it has to be a very personal, like, I have to, like, I want to eat the food that I'm making for someone. And the best food when you get it from someone else, or even like a restaurant, is like probably the food that the chef likes to eat. And I think that's so key, that sort of personal, you know, when you're talking about the work about her grandma, like there has to be, I think that real personal investment will always come through. And as an aside, what's funny is like I was looking at your earrings that you're wearing, and like, perfect. And like, you know, even I think every piece of your work, what's nice about it is I think it just makes me like prouder to be who I am just by seeing the work. And like the earrings, the same thing. It's like even the small thing, it's like, oh, my connection to that flag is reminded, but also like enforced. And I think it's great, like invigorated through that. And I assume it's only because it's probably very personal to you, but that definitely, I think it's really key that comes across, or that it does come across.
Thank you for sharing that.
Does anybody in the, I just wanted to open it up and make sure if people in the audience have questions that they can pop it in the Q&A or raise their virtual hand. And if we don't have any questions, I love this conversation. You always have like so many interesting things, but I was hoping maybe you could just give a little advice, because there are artists who would love to get more engaged with their community, and you know, it's kind of awkward, they don't know where to begin, and maybe you could just give some advice to somebody. It's like, oh, I can't start a radio station, what am I going to do? So like, what would you suggest?
Yeah. Do you want to go first, Dong?
No, I actually want to know what you say.
Okay. Yeah, I think that a great way to get started is to just like I think being like really honest with who you are, the things that you love, the things that you're passionate about. I think that there's huge value in any sort of community organizing. So like you know, if you are really passionate about advocating for like the safety of like sex workers, like, you know, find organizations that are doing that work. Or I also think that, like, you know, when you mentioned like having, you can't have like a radio station, but like there's huge value in just being like, I'm going to talk on my phone and then I'm going to post all of these, even if they're not good. And just like, you know, having zines and sharing all these things that like you just continue to put stuff out there. And I feel like when you are being really honest about your passions and the things that you want to talk about and the things you want to fight for, that like your people will find you. I and like be open to collaborating with folks, like reach out to folks who have been doing work that you're interested in. I think that's probably like the biggest piece of advice that I felt like was really worth it for me, where you're going to make a bunch of stuff and oftentimes like it doesn't go anywhere because it's kind of garbage, but that's okay. Like there's value in validating your work enough to share it and be vulnerable with it. So
Mhm. I actually think there's something you just said with like any creative process. I think you have to get through so much garbage to get to something good, but you have to get through it. Like you can't not put like terrible stuff on the table. Like you have to get it out of your system. Like it's something that's still very difficult, but it's even for me, like doing it for a while, but like, I think that's a key aspect for any creative person. But yeah, and I think a lot of it also comes from like what really upsets you. That's kind of funny. It's like a New Yorker thing. Like what really bugs you, what's been like a thorn in your side, and how can you approach it? And I think there's also a key aspect where it's like, I think especially, I mean, for me, especially in the Asian American creative world, where it's easy to kind of expect someone else to tackle it. Because you're like, look, this must bug other people. And I'm sure it does bug other people. And it's easier to hope someone else does. But weirdly, you know, it still feels like a very nascent culture of like Asian American creative people, especially doing work that's like wholly unique and kind of risky in a lot of ways and very vulnerable. There's zero reason why that person shouldn't be you, I think, in a lot of ways, to put something out there, even if it is really ugly and terrible. Like just just keep going with it. Yeah, I don't know what kind of advice. I'm trying to think of like any like more concrete advice besides some like philosophical garbage, but I don't know, make stuff, whatever you can make, whether it's like a piece of writing or like an image and post it on Instagram, or just like send it to friends. There's always, I mean, I feel like, I'm curious if you have this, Monyee, but like every piece of work that feels very personal that we put out always feels a little scary when I put it out. There's always like a moment of like, am I exposing myself too much? Like, is there going to be wild backlash on this?
it's kind of thrilling though.
It's super thrilling. And I will say, I've never regretted it. I've never had a moment where I was like, I mean, I'm sure I'll like stick my foot in my mouth at some point, but I've never regretted just being like, fuck this, I'm going to say this, or fuck this, I'm going to put this out there. Cause it probably means you believe it at a point, and you will defend it and be very proud of it. And there will be other people that feel the same way.
Yeah. And the people that you want to see it are going to be the ones who, you know, respect you for putting that out there and putting that vulnerability out there. I think you find your people like genuinely when you are really open about yourself, and also not tying your artwork and art making to capitalistic reasons, and knowing that like there's value in just making things without, you know, expecting that your worth is your productivity. And so, yeah.
I love that. I have to say also, like, I also think there's so much value in failure. Like our culture does not appreciate that. And I mean, it's not like I love failing, but I love learning from failures. I think that's really important. So I hope tonight was not a giant failure. I thought tonight was great. I could just listen to you all the time, and I cannot wait until we can be together eating real food in that beautiful bathhouse in the Cayman Islands. Like sign me up. I am all over it. But I want to thank you.
We'll find a way to do a live session from the Cayman Islands somehow.
I love it. I love it. I'm there. Thank you both so much for joining us, for sharing your stories. for your work, and for everything that you do for the communities. So thank you. And thank you to our audience for coming tonight. Remember, you want to know what's happening tomorrow, I can tell you on February, you need to make a donation, because tomorrow is a bad day for buying property or going to court, just so you know. I'm not going to tell you what happens the rest of the week, but it's a good day for starting a business. But
a great day for donations.
It's always a good day for donations, and it's always a great day to get one of these amazing bad boys.
Yeah.
So, I hope we will see you all at a future A4 event. Thank you both, and Happy New Year. And I look forward to seeing you both again very soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Monyee. Thanks, Priscilla.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
A4.
Priscilla. Thank you, Lisa.
Bye.
Bye.